Gold and silver in USD dips, but in AUD, it rips. Hey everyone, this is your weekly price update and analysis brought to you by Ainslie Bullion and the Gold and Silver Standard. My name's Joe. Use the time codes below to go to your favorite metal. We'll just do gold and silver today. And we'll also take a quick look at both of them in Australian dollars as well, because we are Aussie-based and Australian-based companies shipping Australia-wide. Most of you are Australian subscribers, and I want to note the difference between the dipping in gold in US dollar price and the ripping. Now I say rip, not really, but just kind of rhymes, but a price appreciation in Australian dollars. So I want to show you that quick difference as well. But let's start with gold in US dollars. We're using the tradingview.com website, and it is the weekly time frame. Let's pop on the indicators. So last week, here we are. This was called Good Morning Silver. We started with silver, but let's go back to gold right here. We had that beautiful move all the way down below. It was around about 1,880, and then we had that move up to that $1,930 mark. So gold was having a bit of a rip, and so was silver. It was a good morning last week when we saw silver rip through. But let's look at gold. We had that move, and we'll just go here on the daily time frame. So we had that move back above this downtrend line right here, all the way back up to 1,950. I was talking about this level right here of 1,930, and particularly this downtrend line needing to hold. So we broke out, that's good to see, but this needed to hold in order to be confident that we were heading up to the next resistance level at 1,960. Unfortunately, it has been a failed move. Oftentimes from a failed move comes a fast move in the opposite direction. We've seen a break below 1,930. So it looks like we're probably coming down. This is a red day for Wednesday so far. So probably looks like we're coming down to at least the 200-day moving average. I would suggest at $1,918 roughly, breaking through the 200-day moving average, coming back down to this general area. Now I'm not going to give an exact point, but it's going to be around about this area here. I would say between 1,900 and 1890. So a $10 range between 1890 and 1900. Got to hold this area here, or else we are heading down to the sort of 1860 area, as you can see, a previous area of resistance right here. So a little bit of no man's land right now. Definitely want to preferably see it hold above the 200-day moving average at that 1918 level, but do keep that level in mind. Now, gold, that's gold in the USD currency. Of course, we always, and almost always, have our heads in the US dollar spot price version, because the US dollar is the world's reserve currency. But don't forget, wherever you are within the world, you've got to think about it in your particular currency as well. So let's take a look at gold very quickly in Australian dollars. You can see that dip here in the last week or so. If I pop this on the weekly, what you'll notice, definitely a red week so far in the US dollar price of gold. However, when we flip to the Australian dollar price of gold, lo and behold, we're actually green for the week. We actually opened at 3,000 Australian dollars, and we were up around about 25 Australian dollars. We had a peak at around about 40 Australian dollars higher from opening this week. So green week for the Australian dollar. This is why it's very important to view your assets in the currency in which you live in the country in which you live in. Very important, of course, because you're buying goods and services in that country. So why has this happened? For people who don't understand, how can it go down in US dollars but go up in a different currency? That's because obviously the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, and all the currencies float against the US dollar. So in Australia, we have the AUD against the USD. And what that's done in the last week has gone down. So it has weakened against the Australian dollar, against the US dollar, sorry. So when the Australian dollar or any particular currency weakens against the US dollar, you're going to find that the price is going to be different, obviously, between that and the US dollar price. So sometimes they can both go down, but one will go down a little bit more than the other. But in this particular instance, gold's gone down a little bit. The Australian dollar has weakened in a larger percentage against the USD, and that's why you've seen the AUD price of gold go up. So I hope that makes sense. So we've seen a move, a green move for the Australian dollar price. Now I just want to show you the Australian dollar price very quickly of gold per ounce right here. It's definitely a lot more flat, as you can see here. If you take the gold price in USD and that chart, the AUD price goes back to around about 2007. So if we take it from around about there, you can see that big move all the way up to around about 1900 US dollars, that big move back down to nearly 1000 US dollars. So there's a very big dip there. But when you look at that on the Australian dollar price, that dip starts, that's that start of that dip, much less pronounced, as you can see, again, because the Australian dollar over that time was quite high. It was actually above parity, and then it started weakening all the way from $1.10. So the Australian dollar was stronger than the US dollar. It was trading above the US dollar for a decent period of time, a couple of peaks there, and then just since November of 2012, just been a steady decline. Obviously big dips here. The big dip in March of 2020. Let's take a look right here. What you can see in the Australian dollar to US dollar price just recently, have this uptrend going through these two lines, and we've just broken through as well. Not looking good in terms of the Australian dollar price against the US dollar price. However, that also remains on where you want to see it go. Do you want to see it weakening further so that your assets such as gold and silver, Bitcoin as well, are higher in Australian dollars? Or are there other factors where you're thinking, no, we don't want to see too weak of an Australian dollar price because of the costs of goods and services? If you're importing things from the US, for example, you're going to see much higher prices in Australian dollars. So this is a big factor. Using your particular currency, seeing how it floats against the USD, and factoring that in when you're making your decisions of when to purchase precious metals as well. Definitely be using the US price as the general trend, but also figure out what how you're floating against the US dollar in your own currency. So going back to the AUD price just quickly, you can see we're at near all-time highs. In gold, we actually had this move, all-time high, 3,120 Australian dollars. We're near that already. So, we don't have a crystal ball and all that, but we can do a little bit of, what if scenario. So let's say, for example, we have a freeze. This is never going to happen, but in fantasy land, let's say we have a freeze at this particular dollar price of the Australian dollar to the US dollar. Let's say it doesn't move at all for the next, let's say, few months. Let's say 6 months, for example. It just stays there at the 63.6 cents. Now, let's say in that time frame, gold goes to a new all-time high. Let's say it comes back to at least meet its previous all-time high, not even a new all-time high. Let's just say it goes back and goes back to the previous all-time high of 2,080 US dollars. Let's say that does that. Again, fantasy land, not necessarily going to happen, but you never know. But in the next few months, we go back up to 2,080 US dollars. Okay, well, if we put that into the currency conversion right here, 2,080 US dollars, well, that actually makes it an all-time high, a new all-time high in Australian dollars, $3,263. So this is, again, why you need to factor in what your particular currency is doing against the USD. So, for example, that would put it right here at, 3,260 something. So right about there. So got to factor that in, very, very important. We'll take a look at, so I'll do it the similar for silver, but quickly, just gold on as the quick analysis. I've just given you my targets moving lower. So around about that area of between 1890 to 1900 US dollars would be a support level I would definitely need to see hold. Breaking down below there, you're looking at that next level of 1860 US dollars. And we've been talking about it for quite a while. You have the level of between 1960 to 2000, but I'd say 1960 is the next resistance level that you're going to find in the next couple of weeks if we do indeed move up from there. So 1890 to 1900 and 1960 as your resistance level, and that's your support level. So that's gold. Now let's take a look at silver. So similar move. So what you can find here, just on the US dollar price, you had that downtrend line right here. We did see it as resistance. It was a failed move to break above. Again, oftentimes from a failed move comes a fast move in the opposite direction. We had that peak at 24, nearly at $25, but now back under 24 at $23.50. We're butting up against the 200-day moving average right here. If we don't find that as support, then you're coming back down to this downtrend line. It will probably, hopefully, find it as support. We really want to do that around about $22.90 to $23. Breaking below there, you're going to be coming down to your $22 to $22.50 level as your next area of support. Breaking higher, we just want to see it move above the $24.50 level, break above this downtrend line, preferably come up to test 26. Maybe you have another retest of this downtrend line, and then fingers crossed we break through 26 in the coming number of weeks and months. And then, as I've been saying in the last number of analyses, once we break 26, very, very infamous level of support and resistance over the last 15 years or so, once we break that and hold a support, then we're looking a little better. We can say blue skies are, or the skies are clearer for silver. But those are my targets moving lower, around about 23. Want to hold that as support, and this level right here around about 24.50 as resistance. That's the quick version of silver for this week, but I wanted to show you how it's floating again against the Australian dollar. Well, what it's doing in the Australian dollar price, that is. So red week for silver in US dollars. Now, interestingly, also a red week in Australian dollars as well, but not as significant because, again, the Australian dollar has been weakening against the US dollar. So, for example, if I take, let's do a percentage. So let's go to price range, and we'll do that one here. We'll just do it from the opening of the week in US dollars, from $22.30 all the way down to about that $23.40 level. That's a 3.5% move. Whereas when we take a look at it on an Australian dollar time frame, we'll take it from the opening. That's just a roughly 1.8% move. So you can see the differences there. Even though we've had a green week in gold, a red week in silver, but a less of a move down in Australian dollars, again, because it's floating against the US dollar. Let's take a look at the silver price in Australian dollars on the larger time frame, and we'll also do that calculation once more. What happens if we get to a new all-time high in silver? Where would that look? What would that look like in Australian dollars if the Australian dollar price was just stuck at that 63.6 US cents? So obviously right back here in 2011, you can see we actually did come up to that, close to that $50 mark. So that kind of matches roughly with the peak in US dollar silver back in 2011. That's at $48.40. And so we came close to that. That's once again because the Australian dollar was higher, was actually over parity. So that's why in Australian dollars we came up to that $46 level. But since then, and I know we're flipping about here in terms of the charts here, but because we've now seen that steady decline from over parity all the way down to 63.6 cents, again, let's do that fantasy thing. What if that price never moved from here, at least for the next few months, let's say 6 months, for example. And in that time, silver in US dollars creeps all the way back up to, I'll even go higher than my sort of realistic forecast of between $37 to $40. Let's say it goes to all-time high in the next 6 months or so. What's that going to do for silver in that time? Because the Australian dollar is so much weaker against the US dollar. Well, let's put $50. Let's call it an even 50. Let's put $50 in to the currency conversion, and that makes silver in Australian dollars close to 80 Australian dollars again, because we've seen this weakening in the Australian dollar against the US dollar. Now, that puts it roughly, that puts it right up here. Where is that? Let's pop that in just for giggles. All the way up to 80 Australian dollars, which is over a 100% move from here. Now, definitely not saying this is happening, definitely not, but we're just using this as an example of why you always need to take into account over longer periods of time what your particular currency is doing against the world's reserve currency, being the US dollar. But that's a 115% move, roughly, again in that fantasy land that the Aussie dollar doesn't move from there. Now, where do you think the Australian dollar may be going against the US dollar in the coming weeks and months and possibly even years ahead? The sort of short-term prognosis, and of course I'm not an expert in all this, but just looking at the technicals rather than the fundamentals, we have broken through this downtrend line. So it does look, at least in the next couple of weeks, at least, it looks like we may be coming down to this area here around about that 61. So it looks like we are continuing to weaken. And I've got a couple of other low points in here. If we do continue to weaken all the way down, a couple of areas of support. One is here at your 60-cent mark, and that goes back to this previous support level of March of 2020 when we had that huge move all the way down, going from basically parity. Wow, basically parity, and that's of course of the GFC. So the GFC occurred, so not March of 2020, my apologies, this is the GFC low, so 2007, 2008, had the GFC, we went from parity in the USD to all the way down to 60 cents in a very short period of time. So that's the first support level if we continue to break down and go through this little level here. And this very low point, and that's the March of 2020. You know what happened there, where we came down to 55 cents. So potentially, if you believe that we could be continuing in Australian dollars to weaken against the US dollar, and if you think that gold over the longer term is going to have this big cup and handle formation, here's the cup, here's the handle, are we moving higher? So if in that scenario, gold in USD is moving higher, the Australian dollar is moving lower against the USD, then you would actually see a very large or a much larger increase in the Australian dollar price of gold. Does that all make sense? I hope I haven't cluttered your brain with a whole bunch of too much price information there. We're talking about different indices. But I hope that gives you an indication as to why it's so important to look at it in your particular currency as well. Do focus on the US dollar price, but you've got to know what it's doing in your own country, because you're purchasing goods and services in that country is very, very important. And we have seen over the years gold and silver in particular just absolutely skyrocket in certain countries' currency in their particular denomination. So that is gold and silver for this week. We've done the Australian dollar price as well. Go ahead and look at your own price. If you can find it against what it floats against your own currency, do keep that in mind. Keep that on your charts as well. Post a comment below. Let me know, are there any particular technical indicators rather than just support lines and trend lines and the relative strength index as well that you like to use? Post a comment and I might start using those myself. That is it for this week. Next week, we'll probably come back to looking at platinum or we may even take a look at one of the cryptos, maybe Ethereum, quite possibly. We haven't done that for a little bit as well. So balance your wealth in an unbalanced world. Take care. We'll see you next time.